The wine glass shattered against my cheek with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire dining room. For a moment, everything went silent except for the tinkling of broken glass hitting the hardwood floor. I could feel the warm trickle of blood running down my face, mixing with the red wine that now stained my white Christmas dress. Maids must obey. Patricia's voice cut through the silence like a knife. Her face was twisted with rage, her perfectly applied makeup slightly smudged from the wine she'd been drinking all evening. The words hung in the air, and I could feel every pair of eyes in the room staring at me. I stood there frozen, my hand still holding the wine bottle I had politely declined to use just moments before. The cut on my cheek stung, but not nearly as much as the humiliation burning in my chest. Around the table, Thomas's entire family sat in shocked silence. His aunt covered her mouth with her napkin. His cousin's children, who had been laughing and playing just minutes earlier, now stared with wide, frightened eyes. "Patricia!" Robert's voice finally broke through the tension. My father-in-law's face had gone pale, and for the first time in the 3 years I'd known him, he looked genuinely angry at his wife. "What have you done?" But Patricia wasn't finished. She stood up from her chair, swaying slightly from the wine, and pointed a perfectly manicured finger at me. She refused to serve me in my own home. I asked her to pour my wine, and she had the nerve to say no. I touched my cheek gently, feeling the small pieces of glass embedded in my skin. The blood was flowing more freely now, dripping onto the white tablecloth that Patricia had spent hours arranging perfectly for Christmas dinner. I had helped her set this very table just hours ago, folding napkins and polishing silverware while she criticized every move I made. "I was just trying to help," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I thought you'd had enough to drink. I was worried about you." Patricia's laugh was cold and bitter. "Worried about me? You're nobody to worry about me. You're just a little nurse who trapped my son into marriage. You think because you wear scrubs all day that you know it's best for everyone?" That's when Thomas finally found his voice. My husband, who had been sitting beside me in stunned silence, suddenly stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "Mother, stop it. Stop it right now." I had never seen Thomas this angry. His face was red and his hands were shaking as he reached for me. "Amelia, let me see your face. We need to get you cleaned up. Don't you dare take her side." Patricia shrieked. "She disrespected me in front of our entire family on Christmas. She needs to learn her place in this house." "Her place?" Thomas's voice was getting louder. "Her place is as my wife, your daughter-in-law, not your servant." I could see the other family members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Thomas's aunt was gathering her children, clearly wanting to leave. His uncle was staring down at his plate, pretending this wasn't happening. The beautiful Christmas dinner that had taken days to prepare was ruined, and everyone knew it. Patricia's eyes were wild now, and I could see that she was beyond reasoning. "She's nothing. She comes from nothing. Her family has no money, no class, no breeding. I don't know what spell she cast on you, but you were supposed to marry someone worthy of our family name." The words hit me like physical blows. Every insult she'd whispered behind my back for 3 years was now being screamed in front of everyone. Every cruel comment about my background, my job, my family was pouring out of her like poison. But something strange was happening inside me. As I stood there, blood running down my face and wine soaking into my dress, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Anger. Pure, clean anger that burned away the hurt and humiliation I'd been carrying for so long. I looked around the table at all these people who had watched Patricia treat me like dirt for 3 years. They had seen her make me serve drinks at parties while she introduced me as Thomas's little wife. They had heard her tell me to eat in the kitchen because there wasn't enough room at the table for everyone. They had watched her give me cleaning supplies for my birthday and call it a joke. And not one of them had ever said a word. Thomas was still trying to examine my cut, his hands gentle on my face. "We're leaving," he said firmly. "Right now, Amelia needs medical attention." "If you leave this house with her," Patricia hissed, "don't bother coming back. Choose Thomas, her, or your family." I watched my husband's face as he processed his mother's ultimatum. For a moment, I was terrified that he might actually hesitate. But then he looked into my eyes and I saw something there that gave me hope. "I choose my wife," he said quietly. "I should have chosen her a long time ago." Patricia's face went white, then red, then white again. She had clearly expected him to back down like he always did. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "Both of you will regret this." As Thomas helped me toward the door, I turned back to look at Patricia one more time. She was standing there in her expensive dress, surrounded by the ruins of her perfect Christmas dinner, looking smaller and more pathetic than I'd ever seen her. "You're right about one thing, Patricia," I said, my voice steady despite the pain in my cheek. "Someone is going to regret tonight, but it won't be me." I walked out of that house with my head held high, leaving a trail of blood drops on Patricia's pristine white carpet. Behind me, I could hear her screaming at the remaining family members, but I didn't look back. In the car, as Thomas drove me to the emergency room, I stared at my reflection in the side mirror. The cut wasn't deep, but it would leave a small scar, a permanent reminder of this night. But as I watched the blood slowly stop flowing, I made myself a promise. Patricia thought she'd won by humiliating me in front of everyone. She thought she had put me in my place. She had no idea what she had just unleashed. 3 years ago, I thought I was the luckiest woman in the world. Thomas had proposed to me on a beautiful spring evening, and I was floating on clouds of happiness as we drove to his parents' house to share the news. I had heard so much about his mother, Patricia, how elegant she was, how she had raised Thomas to be such a gentleman, how she was the heart of their family. I spent hours getting ready for that first meeting. I chose a conservative blue dress that I thought would show respect, and I even bought flowers from the expensive florist downtown. Thomas had told me his mother loved white roses, so I spent half my paycheck on a beautiful arrangement. When we pulled up to their house, my mouth fell open. It was like something from a magazine, a massive colonial with perfectly manicured gardens and a circular driveway. I had grown up in a small apartment above my father's auto repair shop, and I had never seen anything so grand. Patricia entered the door wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. She was beautiful in that cold, untouchable way that some wealthy women master. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect shining yang, and her makeup looked like it had been applied by a professional. "Mother, this is Amelia," Thomas said, his voice full of pride and excitement. "The woman I'm going to marry." I held out the flowers with a nervous smile. "Mrs. Sterling, it's such an honor to meet you." "Thomas talks about you constantly." Patricia looked at the flowers like I was offering her a dead fish. She took them without a word and handed them immediately to the housekeeper who appeared behind her. "Put these in water, Maria," she said dismissively. That should have been my first warning. During dinner, Patricia asked me question after question about my background. Where did I go to school? What did my parents do for work? Where did I grow up? Each answer seemed to disappoint her more than the last. When I mentioned that my father owned a garage and my mother worked as a secretary, I watched her face close off completely. "How interesting," she said, in a tone that made it clear she found nothing interesting about it at all. "And you're a nurse?" "Yes, I work in pediatrics at General Hospital. I love working with children." "How noble," Patricia replied, but the way she said it made it sound like an insult. "Thomas, didn't you mention that Jennifer Morrison is back from Paris? She finished her art history degree at the Sorbonne. Such an accomplished young woman." Thomas shifted uncomfortably beside me. "Mother, I'm not interested in Jennifer Morrison. I'm in love with Amelia." But I could see the wheels turning in Patricia's head. She had already decided I wasn't good enough for her son, and nothing was going to change her mind. The engagement party was my second taste of Patricia's cruelty. She insisted on hosting it at their country club, and I was grateful until I realized it was all part of her plan. She invited everyone from their social circle, doctors, lawyers, business owners, old money families who had known each other for generations. I spent weeks looking for the perfect dress, finally finding something elegant but affordable at a department store. When I arrived at the party, Patricia took one look at me and smiled that cold smile I was beginning to recognize. "Oh, Amelia, how quaint," she said loud enough for several people to hear. "Thomas, darling, why don't you introduce Amelia to everyone while I make sure the caterers have everything under control?" But instead of letting Thomas introduce me as his fiancée, Patricia spent the entire evening introducing me as Thomas's little friend, or the girl Thomas is seeing. When people asked about our engagement, she would laugh and say, "Oh, you know how young men are. They get these ideas." I watched her work the room like a master manipulator, planting seeds of doubt about me in every conversation. She told Mrs. Henderson that I was sweet, but not really our type of people. She mentioned to Dr. Phillips that she was concerned about Thomas rushing into things. She made sure everyone knew that my family wasn't from their world. The worst part was watching Thomas. He was so busy trying to network and impress his mother's friends that he didn't notice what she was doing. Every time I tried to tell him about it later, he would say I was being too sensitive or that I was misunderstanding his mother's intentions. After we got married, Patricia's behavior got worse, not better. She had a key to our apartment and would let herself in whenever she wanted. I would come home from a 12-hour shift at the hospital to find her rearranging my furniture or going through my kitchen cabinets. "This is all wrong," she would say, moving my dishes around. "Thomas is used to a certain standard of living. You really should learn how to keep a proper home." She criticized everything. My cooking, my decorating, my clothes, even my job. "I don't understand why you insist on working," she would say. "Thomas makes enough money to support you. All this nursing business is so common." When we hosted dinner parties, Patricia would arrive early and take over. She would send me to the kitchen to help while she played hostess in my own home. If I tried to join the conversation, she would interrupt me or change the subject. She made me feel like a servant in my own house. The breaking point should have been last Christmas when she gave me a set of cleaning supplies as a gift. "I thought these might be useful," she said with that fake smile. "The house always seems to need a little extra attention when I visit." Thomas laughed it off as one of his mother's jokes, but I saw the looks on his relatives' faces. They knew exactly what she was doing, and they were embarrassed for me. But I kept trying. I kept hoping that if I was patient enough, kind enough, helpful enough, she would eventually accept me. I cooked her favorite meals when she visited. I remembered her birthday and bought thoughtful gifts. When she had Aminor surgery last year, I took time off work to help care for her. Nothing worked. If anything, my kindness seemed to make her more cruel. She saw it as weakness, as proof that she could treat me however she wanted without consequences. Standing in that bathroom on Christmas night, looking at my cut face in the mirror, I finally understood the truth. Patricia didn't dislike me because of anything I had done or failed to do. She disliked me because I existed, because I had taken her son away from her, because I represented everything she thought was beneath her family. For 3 years, I had been fighting a war I didn't even know I was in. But now the gloves were off. Now she would learn what happened when you pushed a nurse too far. The emergency room doctor finished cleaning my cut with gentle hands. "You're lucky," she said, applying the last piece of medical tape. "It's not deep enough to need stitches, but you'll want to keep it clean and dry for the next few days." I nodded, barely listening. My mind was spinning with thoughts that had nothing to do with my injury. Thomas sat beside me, holding my hand and apologizing for the 100th time since we'd left his parents' house. "I should have stood up to her years ago," he kept saying. "I'm so sorry, Amelia. I'm so sorry." But I wasn't thinking about apologies anymore. I was thinking about Patricia's face when she realized her perfect Christmas dinner was ruined. I was thinking about how quickly her mask had slipped when she threw that glass. Most importantly, I was thinking about what I knew about Patricia Sterling that nobody else did. We drove home in silence, and Thomas went straight to bed, emotionally exhausted from the confrontation with his mother. But I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at the small bandage on my cheek, and let my mind wander back to a conversation I'd overheard 6 months ago. I had been in Patricia's powder room during one of her dinner parties when I heard voices in the hallway. Patricia was talking to her friend Margaret about the upcoming charity auction. "I just don't understand how people like the Hendersons can afford to bid on these items." Margaret had said, "Didn't his father work in a factory?" "Oh, Margaret," Patricia had laughed. "You know how it is. Some people just get lucky. Not all of us can trace our families back to the founding fathers like you can." But then Margaret had said something that made my blood run cold. "Well, at least you understand the importance of breeding, Patricia. I remember when you first moved here from that little town. What was it called, Millfield? Your transformation has been remarkable." There had been a long pause before Patricia responded, her voice tight. "That was a very long time ago, Margaret. I prefer not to dwell on the past." I had pressed myself against the bathroom door, hardly daring to breathe. Patricia had always claimed her family was old money from the city. She had photographs in her living room of what she said were her grandparents' estate. She wore her family history like a crown, using it to justify her treatment of people she considered beneath her. But Margaret's words suggested something very different. That night, I had gone home and done something I probably shouldn't have. I looked up Millfield online. It was a tiny industrial town about 3 hours away. The kind of place where people worked in factories and lived in small houses with chain-link fences. Nothing like the elegant background Patricia claimed. I had pushed the information to the back of my mind, telling myself it didn't matter. Everyone had the right to reinvent themselves. But now, sitting in my kitchen with a cut on my face from Patricia's wine glass, I realized that information might be exactly what I needed. I opened my laptop and started searching. It took me most of the night, but I found what I was looking for. Patricia's real name wasn't Patricia Sterling. It was Patty Kowalski. Her father hadn't been a distinguished businessman. He had worked as a janitor at the local high school. Her mother had cleaned houses for wealthy families in the next town over. The more I dug, the more I found. Patricia had gotten a scholarship to a state college where she met Robert Sterling. She had completely erased her past, creating an elaborate fiction about her family's wealth and status. The photographs in her living room weren't of her grandparents' estate. They were pictures she had bought at antique shops. But the real treasure was what I found in the local newspaper archives. There was a small article from 30 years ago about a young woman named Patty Kowalski, who had been arrested for shoplifting expensive clothes from a department store. The charges had been dropped, but there was a photograph. Even 30 years younger and with different hair, it was unmistakably Patricia. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. Patricia had built her entire identity on a lie. Everything she used to justify her cruelty, her sense of superiority, her treatment of people like me, it was all fake. But having the information was only half the battle. I needed to figure out how to use it. That's when I remembered the New Year's Gala. Patricia hosted it every year at the country club, and it was the social event of the season. Everyone who mattered in her world would be there. All the wealthy families, the business leaders, the old money crowd that Patricia desperately wanted to impress. She always gave a speech at the gala talking about the importance of charity and community service. She positioned herself as the moral center of their social circle, the woman who set the standards for everyone else. What if this year's speech was a little different? I spent the rest of the night planning. I knew Patricia's schedule better than she thought I did. After 3 years of being treated like her personal assistant, I knew when she went to her hair appointments, when she had lunch with her friends, when she would be out of the house. I also knew about her garden. Patricia's rose garden was her pride and joy, the thing she was most vain about. She had spent 20 years cultivating it, and she gave tours to anyone who would listen. She had won awards from the garden club, and she never missed an opportunity to mention them. The garden was visible from the street, and all her neighbors knew how much she treasured it. If something happened to those roses, everyone would know about it within hours. But the garden was just the beginning. The real revenge would come at the gala in front of everyone who had watched her humiliate me for years. I would give Patricia exactly what she had given me, public humiliation in front of the people whose opinions mattered most to her. I closed my laptop and touched the bandage on my cheek. Patricia thought she had won tonight. She thought she had finally put me in my place, shown everyone exactly what she thought of me. She had no idea that she had just handed me the keys to her destruction. Tomorrow, I would start gathering everything I needed. By New Year's Eve, Patricia Sterling would learn what it felt like to have her carefully constructed world come crashing down around her. The maid was about to become the master. Patricia woke up on December 26th with a splitting headache and the bitter taste of regret in her mouth. Not regret for what she had done to me. I knew her well enough to know she would never feel sorry for that. No, she regretted that Thomas had chosen to leave with mine instead of staying to smooth things over like he usually did. She made her way downstairs in her silk robe, expecting to find Robert reading his newspaper in the breakfast nook like every other morning for the past 40 years. Instead, she found him standing at the kitchen window, his coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips. "Robert!" she called out, irritation already creeping into her voice. "What are you staring at?" He didn't answer. He just stood there looking out at the backyard with an expression she had never seen before. Patricia walked over to see what had captured his attention so completely. That's when she screamed. Her rose garden, her beautiful, perfect, award-winning rose garden, was destroyed. Every single bush had been cut down to ugly brown stumps. 20 years of careful cultivation. Hundreds of prize-winning roses gone overnight. The garden that had been featured in Better Homes and Gardens magazine looked like a graveyard. But that wasn't the worst part. Spray painted across her white garden fence in bright red letters were the words, "Maids must obey." Her own cruel words from the night before, thrown back at her like a slap in the face. Patricia's legs gave out and she sank into one of the kitchen chairs, her hand pressed to her chest. "Who would do this?" she whispered. Who would do such a thing? But even as she asked the question, she knew there was only one person who had heard those words. Only one person who had reason to hate her this much. "That little witch," Patricia hissed. "That vindictive little nobody. She did this." Robert finally turned away from the window, and Patricia was shocked to see something that looked almost like satisfaction in his eyes. "Can you prove it?" he asked quietly. "Of course it was her. Who else would it be?" I said, "Can you prove it?" Robert's voice was firmer than she had heard it in years. "Because if you're going to accuse someone of destroying our property, you better have evidence." Patricia stared at her husband in disbelief. In 40 years of marriage, Robert had never questioned her about anything. He had always been the quiet, supportive husband who let her take the lead in social situations, but something in his tone told her that the events of last night had changed something fundamental between them. "You saw what she did to me at dinner," Patricia said, her voice rising. "She disrespected me in front of our entire family. She refused to serve me wine in my own home. What I saw," Robert said carefully, "was throwing a glass at a young woman's face because she was concerned about how much you had been drinking." Patricia felt like the world was tilting beneath her feet. "She's turned you against me too, hasn't she? Just like she turned Thomas against me." Robert sat down his coffee mug and looked at his wife with tired eyes. "Patricia, I've watched you treat that girl like dirt for 3 years. I've watched you humiliate her at parties, criticize everything she does, and make her feel unwelcome in our family. Last night was just the final straw. She's not good enough for Thomas." Patricia shrieked. "She comes from nothing. Her family has no class, no breeding, no money. And where exactly do we come from, Patricia?" Robert's question hung in there like a bomb waiting to explode. Patricia's face went white. In all their years of marriage, Robert had never questioned the story she had told about her background. He had accepted her version of events and never pushed for details about her family or her past. "I don't know what you mean," she said, but her voice was shaking. "I think you do." Robert walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up a manila envelope that Patricia hadn't noticed before. "This was in our mailbox this morning." With trembling hands, Patricia opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies of newspaper articles, old photographs, and what looked like public records. Her maiden name, her real maiden name, was highlighted in yellow on several documents. The room started spinning as Patricia realized what she was looking at. Someone had found out about her past. Someone knew the truth about Patty Kowalski from Millfield. "Where did this come from?" she whispered. "There was no return address," Robert said. "But whoever sent it was very thorough." Patricia's mind was racing. If Robert had this information, who else might have it? Her friends, her neighbors, the people at the country club? She thought about the New Year's gala just 5 days away. 100 of the most important people in town would be there. "If this information got out before then you have to help me," she said, grabbing Robert's arm. "We have to find out who's doing this and stop them." Robert gently removed her hand from his arm. Maybe it's time to stop pretending. Patricia, maybe it's time to be honest about who we really are. Honest. Patricia's voice was getting hysterical. I've spent 40 years building our reputation in this town. I've worked so hard to give Thomas the kind of life he deserves. I can't let some vengeful little nurse destroy everything I've built. Everything you've built is based on lies, Robert said sadly. And maybe it's time for those lies to catch up with you. Patricia stared at her husband as if she was seeing him for the first time. The quiet, supportive man she had married was gone, replaced by someone who looked at her with disappointment and something that might have been pity. She ran upstairs to her bedroom and locked the door, her mind spinning with panic. Someone was systematically destroying her life, and she was pretty sure she knew who it was, but knowing and proving were two different things. She looked out her bedroom window at the destroyed garden, at the red words painted on her fence. The neighbors would start talking soon. Mrs. Henderson next door was probably already on the phone, spreading the news throughout their social circle. Patricia sank onto her bed, still clutching the envelope of evidence about her past. For the first time in 40 years, she felt truly afraid. Someone out there knew all her secrets, and they were just getting started. The phone rang, and Patricia jumped. It was Margaret, her voice full of false concern. "Patricia, darling, I just heard about your garden. How absolutely terrible. Do you have any idea who might have done such a thing?" Patricia closed her eyes, knowing that by evening everyone in town would know about the destruction, and soon they might know much more than that. "No," she whispered into the phone. "I have no idea at all," but she was lying. Sheik knew exactly who was behind this. The question was, what was I planning to do next? New Year's Eve arrived with a crisp winter evening that seemed perfect for Patricia's annual charity gala. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the elegant black dress I had bought specifically for tonight. The small scare in my cheek had healed nicely, leaving only a thin line that I had covered with makeup. But I could still feel it there, a reminder of why I was doing this. Thomas was downstairs pacing nervously in his tuxedo. He had been trying to convince me not to go all week, worried that his mother might cause another scene. He had no idea that I was counting on exactly that. "Are you sure about this?" he asked when I came downstairs. "We could just stay home, order takeout, watch the ball drop on TV." I kissed his cheek gently. "Your mother has hosted this gala for 15 years. Half the town will be there. If we don't show up, it will just prove to everyone that she won." What I didn't tell him was that I had spent the past week making sure this would be a night no one would ever forget. The country club was decorated beautifully with white flowers and gold accents everywhere. Patricia had outdone herself, and I had to admit she had excellent taste when it came to event planning. She stood near the entrance in a stunning silver gown greeting guests with her perfect hostess smile. When she saw Thomas and me walk in, her smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. She had no choice but to greet us politely in front of all her guests. "Thomas, darling," she said, kissing his cheek. "And Amelia," she nodded at me coolly. "How nice that you could make it." "We wouldn't miss it," I replied with my sweetest smile. "I even prepared a little surprise for you." Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly, but before she could respond, other guests were approaching, and she had to turn her attention to them. I spent the first hour of the party mingling, making small talk with people who had watched Patricia humiliate me for years. Many of them seemed surprised to see me there, and I could tell they were wondering if there would be drama. They had no idea how right they were. At 9, Patricia took the stage to give her annual speech about the importance of charity and giving back to the community. She looked radiant under the spotlights, every inch the elegant society matron she had worked so hard to become. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying perfectly through the room, "thank you all for joining us tonight for our 15th annual New Year's Charity Gala. As we prepare to enter a new year, I think it's important to reflect on our blessings and remember those less fortunate than ourselves." The crowd murmured their approval. Patricia was in her element, commanding the room with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. "Tonight, I want to talk about the importance of knowing where we come from," she continued. "Our heritage, our family values, the foundations that make us who we are. I smiled to myself. She was making this almost too easy. But before I continue, Patricia said, I understand that someone has prepared a special tribute. Amelia, would you please join me on stage? The room fell silent. This wasn't part of the planned program, and everyone could sense the tension crackling between us. Thomas grabbed my arm, his face pale with worry, but I patted his hand reassuringly. It's okay, I whispered. Trust me. I walked to the stage with my head held high, carrying the laptop I had brought for this exact moment. Patricia's smile was frozen in place, but I could see the panic in her eyes. Thank you, Patricia, I said, taking the microphone. I did indeed prepare something special for tonight. A tribute to a woman who has taught me so much about family, about values, and about the importance of truth. I connected my laptop to the projection system, and the first slide appeared on the large screen behind me. It was a beautiful photo of Patricia from last year's gala, looking elegant and confident. Patricia Sterling, I began a pillar of this community for decades. She has taught us all about the importance of breeding, of class, of knowing one's place in society. The audience nodded along, unsure where this was going. Patricia stood frozen beside me, unable to leave the stage without causing a scene. But tonight, I continued, I want to share the real story of Patricia Sterling, because I think it's important that we all know where we really come from. I clicked to the next slide and gasps echoed through the room. It was a photograph from a 30-year-old newspaper showing a young woman being arrested for shoplifting. The caption clearly identified her as Patty Kowalski. Meet Patty Kowalski, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. Daughter of Stanley Kowalski, a janitor at Millfield High School, and Mary Kowalski, who cleaned houses for wealthy families. Patricia made a strangled sound beside me, but I continued clicking through the slides. Birth certificates, school records, employment documents, all the evidence I had gathered over the past week. Patty grew up in a small house on Elm Street in Millfield. I continued. She worked her way through college on scholarships and part-time jobs. She was smart, ambitious, and determined to create a better life for herself. The room was completely silent now. I could see people pulling out their phones, some recording, others probably texting friends who weren't there. There's nothing wrong with coming from humble beginnings, I said, looking directly at Patricia. There's nothing shameful about having parents who worked hard to provide for their family. What's shameful is lying about it. What's shameful is using a fake background to justify treating other people like they're beneath you. I clicked to the final slide. Security camera footage from Christmas night showing Patricia throwing the wine glass at my face. This is what happens when someone challenges Patricia's carefully constructed world. I said when someone refuses to know their place, as she puts it. She threw this glass at my face because I wouldn't pour her more wine because I dared to treat her like an equal instead of my superior. Patricia finally found her voice. You vindictive little witch, she screamed, lunging toward me. How dare you? But Thomas was already on the stage, stepping between us. Mother, stop, he said firmly. Just stop. The room erupted in whispers and shocked conversations. People were staring at Patricia like they had never seen her before. Her carefully constructed reputation was crumbling in real time. I handed the microphone back to Patricia with a smile. Thank you for teaching me so much about family values, I said, and about the importance of truth. As Thomas and I walked off the stage together, I could hear Patricia behind us trying desperately to explain, to justify, to salvage something from the wreckage of her lies. But it was too late. The truth was out and there was no taking it back. The maid had finally taught the mistress her place,